Okay, so we're getting into what most people consider like the basics of biology. We're going to be talking about cells and their main jobs. And so first off, we have to, oops, there's a picture missing. We have to realize that there are different types of cells, and we generally categorize them into two main types, eukaryotes and prokaryotes. But within eukaryotes, there are many different kingdoms, and so there are also different forms of a cell. So animal cells we have here on the left side of the screen, kind of globular, mushy. On the right-hand side of the screen, we have plant cells, which are very rigid because of that extra cell wall structure. Bacteria cells, I don't know why my picture didn't pop up, but they are very, very simple cells. I think we'll see it on another slide, though. Yeah, so here's a bacteria cell compared to a eukaryotic cell. So prokaryote is always bacteria. If you're looking at a bacteria cell, you are looking at a prokaryotic cell. If you're looking at any other kingdom of cell, you're looking at a eukaryotic cell, okay? And so the animal cell, the eukaryotic cell, we can see here is much, much larger. We are only looking at a partial pie piece of the eukaryotic cell, but we can see the entire bacteria cell. And so for every, one of our cells, we have many, 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 many more bacteria cells actually living in and on it. And so we actually have more bacteria cells in our body than we do of actual human cells. Kind of crazy. And so we already learned this organization structure that cells make tissues, tissues make organs, and organs make organ systems, and eventually the organism. And so what's really awesome about a cell is that every job of life that our body carries out on the organism scale, your cells do on a cellular scale also. So everything that makes life work happens at the cell level first. And so these are some of the jobs that our cells do and our bodies do. Oh, it's supposed to be ATP on a row, sorry. And so, for example, we know that we have to breathe oxygen and remove carbon dioxide. Your cells do that, and it basically helps your body to make ATP energy. ATP is an abbreviation for adenosine triphosphate. It's a very high energy molecule. We're going to talk a lot about it. Our cells are able to build molecules, remove waste. They're able to maintain homeostasis. The cell membrane is very, very key in maintaining homeostasis. Respond to external environment, so they can respond to cell signals and different environmental conditions and adapt to that condition. And then as far as growth and development, cells make more cells. That's one of the statements of the cell theory that we already talked about. And so, in general, we can say that cells have three main jobs. That they make energy, they make protein, and they make more cells. And so within the cell, there are small structures called organelles. So this root word ending E-L-L-E, anytime you see that attached to a word, it just means like the small version of that. So instead of talking about organs, like big organs, we're talking about little organs, organelles. And so each structure within a eukaryotic cell has a specific job. And so most of these structures that we are talking about are only found in eukaryotic cells. The exception to that are the ribosomes. Ribosomes are found in all cells. So first off, making energy. So just to carry out basic life processes, the cell has to have ATP. In order to make ATP, the cell has to be able to take in sugar and oxygen, and through this process of cellular respiration, it creates ATP. And then the waste product of carbon dioxide is removed from the cell. And so we are going to talk very in depth about making energy. This is just kind of a brief overview. And so organelles that help the cell do that, we have the cell membrane, lysosomes, vacuoles and vesicles, and the mitochondria. So going through these different things. So here we're looking at the cell membrane. And so the cell membrane, we said, was involved in homeostasis. It has this really cool structure. So here we're looking at the phospholipid bilayer of the cell membrane. And so these circles are representing the phosphate heads. The squiggles are representing the lipid tails. And this makes a really, really great barrier because there are many molecules that are not soluble in this nonpolar region of the cell membrane, and so it kind of keeps the stuff out that it's supposed to keep out and keeps this good stuff in. This molecule is also called amphipathic, and so think of like an amphibian, like a frog. It likes to live on land and in water. Well, this molecule, the phospholipid, is also amphipathic because the phosphate head is polar, so it likes, it's attracted to water, it's hydrophilic, but this interior region made of these fatty acid tails are nonpolar and therefore hydrophobic. So part of it likes water, part of it hates water. Again, that also makes a good barrier. And so different things are able to come into and out of the cells based on their polarity, their solubility, different kinds of things. And so the cell membrane also allows for communication, and so there are different structures on the cell membrane that allow the cell to communicate. So these carbohydrate chains are kind of like little cell phone towers that allow the cells to talk to each other. There are also different proteins. There are surface proteins and integral proteins. Some of them are used as surface receptors for information, and some of them are used as transport proteins to move things from one side of the cell to the other. So lots of things involved with the cell membrane. And so for the nutrient material to get into the cell, it needs to be able to pass through the cell membrane so that the cell can use that nutrient to make energy. At the same time, any of the waste products that are made also need to be expelled out of the cell, so they have to move back out of the cell membrane. And so here we're looking at a cell, and so you have a blank diagram on your notes, and so you can kind of label as we go. So the cytoplasm is just the background jelly goo stuff that keeps everything in place, and the cell membrane is the surrounding edge of the cell. And so I know here we're looking at a cutaway model. Really think about a cell like being a basketball. It's a 3D object, and all those little dots, all those little dimples on the basketball, those are like the phosphate heads of the phospholipid bilayer. And so you have this structure all the way around the cell. Vacuoles and vesicles are also part of the energy-making process. And so we can see here that there's a food particle that is joining with a section of the cell membrane, and that's being drawn into the cell in a form that we call a vesicle. And it fuses with another little vacuole here that has digestive enzymes, and it breaks down that food material into usable nutrients. And so this is also part of breaking down so that the cell can take a complex carbohydrate, make a simple carbohydrate that we can use to make energy. So vacuoles in animal cells or animal-like cells are somewhat different from the vacuoles of a plant cell. And so we can see here in animal and protist cells that we have a couple of small little food vacuoles going on here. This one here in the protist is called a contractile vacuole, that they hold water temporarily, and it can squish the water back out of the cell in case the cell's getting too much water through osmosis. It can squish the water back out. Here in the plant cell, we can see that the central vacuole is a very, very, very large space in the cell. It doesn't quite look like it here, but the central vacuole actually takes up about 90 to 95% of the volume of a plant cell, and everything else is just kind of squished to the edges of the cell membrane. And so here we have vacuoles and vesicles. A lysosome is a specialized type of vacuole that has digestive enzymes. And so again, we break down food to get the simpler components so we can make the ATP through cellular respiration. They can also be used as waste disposal, so they can break down any kind of misbehaving protein or any organelle that's not functioning properly. A lysosome can join with that and destroy that misbehaving part. Something interesting that happens in the life cycle is that we have initially webbed toes and webbed fingers, but at a certain stage of development, the lysosomes in those cells rupture, killing the cell, and this process is called apoptosis. However, in some people, that doesn't happen completely, and so they are born with fused fingers and fused toes. You can also see this process happen if you've ever watched a tadpole develop into a frog. As that tadpole loses its tail and becomes more and more frog-like, that process is also apoptosis, where it's losing the tail cells. Okay, and here we have the mitochondria. So this is where cellular respiration takes place. This is what uses the sugar and oxygen that were brought into the cell through the cell membrane and the vacuoles and vesicles. And this is where the cell makes ATP. Again, ATP is short for adenosine triphosphate. And this is a very high energy molecule that can fuel the rest of the body's processes. So this is where metabolism happens. This is where a lot of essential energy comes from for us, is from the mitochondria. So a mitochondria is unique to only eukaryotic cells. So bacteria, they do this process, a similar process, but they do it within their own cell membrane. They don't have another organelle that they can pass the job off to. And you can see this mitochondria is very complex, so this is an electron micrograph of it. And so you can see that it has an inner and an outer membrane. And so there's a lot of folding, so it's a lot of surface area, and that surface area allows for a high amount of cellular respiration to take place and therefore make a lot of ATP. And so there are the mitochondria. Okay, so plants can also make energy, but plants are super awesome because they have both mitochondria and chloroplast. It was a common misconception that the difference between plant and animal cells were that plants have chloroplast and animals have mitochondria. Well, that's not true. Plants have both. Okay, so we know that plants have chloroplast because they're green. They do this process of photosynthesis where they convert sunlight and carbon dioxide into ATP and sugar. But this sugar is also used by the mitochondria of the plant cell to make even more ATP. Okay, a plant isn't just sweet so that you can eat it. That sugar has a purpose of serving as its own energy source if needed. And so we're going to kind of take a little sidetrack here, talk about mitochondria and chloroplast. These are not regular endomembrane organelles, okay? They're not like a regular vacuole. They're not like the endoplasmic reticulum like we're going to talk about. They are completely different from that system. They are considered to be semi-autonomous, which means that they can replicate on their own. They are, they are still within the cell, but they can make more mitochondria or more chloroplast without the assistance of the cell. they have their own ribosomes, and they even have their own DNA. So you might have seen some of these commercials for find out your heritage and whatnot on these Ancestry.com commercials. Well, what they're looking at mostly is mitochondrial DNA. Your mitochondrial DNA is only inherited from your mother. And so you have a genome, which you have 50% from your mom and 50% from your dad. But your mitochondrial genome is only from your mother. And so they're looking at this mitochondrial DNA to determine origins and ethnicities and things like that. So it's kind of interesting. And so the DNA within this mitochondria or chloroplast is circular. It's only one chromosome. This is very, very, very similar to how bacterial cells are. And so they're able to make their own proteins because they have their own ribosomes, so very similar in structure to bacteria cells. And so this hypothesis was put forward by Lynn Margulis in the 1980s, so the theory of endosymbiosis. And so it was a hypothesis that has since become a theory, and I think she has actually won the Nobel fairly recently. I have to go back and fill that in. But basically, this was a hypothesis that stated that there was an ancestral cell that engulfed a mitochondria, and instead of eating it and using it as a food source, it developed a symbiotic relationship. And then from that initial point of endosymbiosis, the line diverged into two different, where we had only cells that only had mitochondria, or cells that also later had an additional engulfing of a chloroplast, of a photosynthetic prokaryote, and went on to form all of the photosynthetic organisms. And so this is was proposed in the 1980s. She's since won a Nobel Prize. I have to go back and find the date. But she was very, very influential in biology, but she was ignored for a long, long time. People just said, you know, oh, that's a crazy idea. What are you talking about? But we've done a lot of research and found this to be pretty accurate. Okay, so I'm going to take a break here, and I'll get back with you guys in just a bit.